My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, once again, I said it's good to be with you. In today's readings, they have an awful lot of names, the names of cities, the names of people, very complicated, difficult to even to articulate, so congratulations to our reader for doing so well. But the whole point of the readings, of both of them, is a challenge to faith in difficult times and difficult circumstances, like in our circumstances. You know, this pandemic that we are going through will be recorded in history. This will not be forgotten, or should not be forgotten very easily. And we basically, I think, have to ask ourselves, what do we learn from this? What have we learned? In today's readings, and both readings, what comes through very prominently is the importance of faith. Without your faith, you will never come to deal with those difficult situations, because in both instances, with all of these petty kinglets, there was constant fighting, one trying to overcome and better the other. And the challenge of Isaiah, and also in the gospel reading, is that in all of these situations, what is important is faith. Especially today's gospel reading. Woe to you, Chorazin, and woe to you, Bethsaida, because you have had the privilege, the opportunity to recognize Jesus performing, as said, these mighty deeds, referring to his signs and to his miracles. But you know, you really were there, but you never learned. You didn't recognize during that time what was really happening and who this person was that was performing these signs. And as the gospel reading says, you know, those people who lived in those pagan cities really could learn far more than you who had encountered Jesus Christ. Tyre and Sidon, they were not cities that were really where Jesus had passed. But they learned something, and you learned very little. And so I think the challenge of our scriptures today is what do we learn from this experience that we're going through, this historical moment that will be recorded in history? And I think the challenge for all of us is to recognize that although we have this very challenging period, we have to ask ourselves, what have we learned from it? Well, we learned from it that we are certainly vulnerable people. And ultimately, there are situations that we confront that we can't fully understand or recognize. What's the point of this? What do we learn? What do we come away from this as we go through it? As I reflect on this, I mean, there are just many things that I've recognized more and more, that as we face this pandemic together, we recognize people who are profoundly faithful, people who are generous and good, people who are caring and reach out to one another. But there are also people who are very selfish and think only of themselves. We also recognize that we are all in this together, that we experience this in different ways with different crosses that we find in this situation. And so the thought that really struck me as I read these scriptures and I was reflecting on them I asked myself two questions, which I would also leave with you. And the question is basically, what have we learned from this pandemic? What have we learned in terms of ourselves going forward? Have we been somehow enriched by what we are experiencing, or are we maybe grown more lacking in hope as we face the future? And so as this time and this period, same thing interestingly in today's scriptures, as we go through these, we ask ourselves two questions. What have I learned from this up to this particular point in terms of myself as I confront the future, the years that I have ahead? What does it say to me? And the other question is similar to it. If I had known somehow that I would be experiencing these times and these circumstances of this pandemic, would I have done anything different going into it? And what would I have done different in knowing that I would be facing this? Something that maybe we could think about, not just simply at this Mass, but maybe throughout the day. Have I profited from this in any way? In what way have I profited? Have I been enriched by it? And what would I have done differently had I known that I would be going through this experience?